Look at her. Her bow is smashed and her hull is ripped. It's hard to believe that she once was the pride of the Connaught Line. Her name was the Lusitania. She was fast, beautiful, and loved by hundreds. She faced rogue waves. She won the Blue Ribbon 3 times. But what is she doing underwater? How could she, after nearly being sunk by a rogue wave? After being one of the fastest ships of its time, why was it sunk? Why, on a clear day off the coast of Ireland? It was so close to land, why did it sink so fast when the Titanic took 2 hours? And 40 minutes to sink, why did it sink in 18 minutes? Killing so many passengers. Well, this is the Lusitania, the ship of doom. Construction of this British ocean liner, which was owned by the Cunard Shipping Line, began in 1904. Upon completion 3 years later, this massive vessel set sail on its maiden voyage across the highly lucrative transatlantic passage. When she took part at Liverpool for the first time, it is estimated that 100,000 spectators gathered at various points along the Mersey River to watch her go. It was said that if you wanted to go fast across the Atlantic Ocean, the Lusitania was the way to go. At an average speed of 24 knots, the ship helped travelers reach their destination a full day faster than Cunard's competitors. On its maiden voyage, the Lusitania was, for a short time, the largest passenger ship in the world, measuring 787 feet in length and weighing approximately 31,550 tons. The ship's beauty was matched only by its complexity. From the start, it was a challenge to keep the Lusitania at her finest. In the first winter at sea, it was discovered that woodwork in the first-class writing rooms and dining salon had begun to shrink and needed to be rebuilt as well. The ship's pipes froze in cold weather and ruptured. But in the end, the ship endured. It was fast, comfortable, and adored by all that stepped aboard her. By the end of April 1915, Lusitania had completed 201 crossings of the Atlantic. On May 1, 1915, the Lusitania was preparing to depart from New York City. Many excited passengers opened their morning paper to find a notice that had been placed. It read, "Travelers intending to embark on the Atlantic voyage are reminded that a state of war exists between Germany and her allies and Great Britain and her allies. That the zone of war includes the waters adjacent to the British Isles. That, in accordance with formal notice given by the Imperial German government, vessels flying the flag of Great Britain or of any of her allies are liable to destruction in those waters, and the travelers sailing in the war zone on ships of Great Britain or her allies do so at their own risk." That was in the New York City newspaper, but nobody took it seriously, and only a couple people cancelled their voyage on board Lusitania. On May 1, 1915, the Lusitania departed New York bound for Liverpool. Meanwhile, along the northeast coast of Germany, a vessel of a different sort slipped silent out of the harbor. This was the German submarine U-20, captained by Walter Speger. Speger had just turned 32, but was considered an expert in the matters of submarine warfare, and his ship was often used to try out submarine tactics. He was one of the few U-boat captains that had been part of the German submarine service before the war began. Although he was free to submerge the U-2 whenever he wanted, he could travel much faster and further while on the surface. Once at a radio contact, The U-20 and crew would be on their own, and Captain Spiegel would have absolute authority on how he conducted his patrols. His ship was also one of only 25 able to travel long distances. On this patrol, Trigger had orders to move into position between England and Ireland and hunt down transport vessels to hinder England's chance of invading Germany. Once outside New York Harbor, the Lusitania accelerated. But Captain William Thomas Turner did not bring her up to full speed, as he was about to rendezvous with 3 ships, HMS Bristol and Essex, as well as the Cronia, a Cunard liner repurposed for military use. As the Lusitania came to a stop, the other 3 ships each lowered a boat full of mail bound for England. Once the mail bags were aboard, Captain Turner gave the orders for full speed ahead. Normally, all of Lusitania's furnaces and boilers would be fully engaged during a crossing, black smoke pouring from her smokestacks. But the war had caused a decline in travel so dramatic that Cunard had been searching for ways to save money wherever possible. Captain Turner was given orders to use only 3 of its 4 boiler rooms for a savings of 16 tons of coal per trip. But this also slowed the ship from its top speed of 25 knots down to 21. Cunard didn't publicize the changes, and few, if any, passengers seemed to notice. By Thursday evening, the Lusitania entered what the Germans considered the war zone round Great Britain. As the passengers sat down to an elaborate meal, the Lusitania's wireless operator picked up a message from Ireland. Submarines active along the southern coast of Ireland. At the same time, the ship received another message. This one directed to all British ships. It stated that all vessels must stay within 2 miles of England's southern coast, but ships en route to Liverpool stay in mid-channel. Coming in together, these 2 messages were ominous and confusing. One thing was certain though, the Lusitania was now cruising through sub-infested waters, where would spend the rest of its voyage to Liverpool. Friday, May 7, 1915, the final day of the Lusitania. Early risers found comfortable spots on deck to watch the sunrise at 5:30. As they watched the sky slowly warm from cobalt to tangerine, they caught sight of the HMS Partridge, a high-speed British destroyer with 3 funnels. This sight was comforting to all who saw it, as it gave the feeling of safety and protection to those on board the Lusitania. Unfortunately, the Partridge had no such orders to escort the cruise ship and continued on its own course. Soon a thick patch of fog rolled in, and Captain Turner was forced to slow the ship to 15 knots and continue course. By 11 o'clock and the fog was beginning to clear, and another message was received on the wireless. It stated submarines active on southern part of Irish Channel. The sender added, "Make sure the Lusitania gets this." This was dead ahead on Lucy's course. The fog had cleared by now, and if a submarine was stationed in the center of the channel, the smoke from Lucy's 3 working funnels would be visible 20 miles in any direction, giving any sub an excellent chance in spotting the ship. Turner brought the ship up to 18 knots. He also ordered maximum pressure in the boiler in the event that an emergency speed boost was necessary. Ahead of the Lusitania, U-20 caught sight of its next target. Spiegel had the sub traveling at full speed below the water, in hopes that he would get lucky enough to move into position in time. Just then the Lusitania changed course, and was now headed directly towards U-20. She could not have steered a more perfect course if she had deliberately tried to give us a dead shot, Spiegel later wrote in his logs. With the Lusitania on its new course, U-20 set up a position to give it the perfect shot. Within the sub, tensions mounted. All the ship had to do was make another turn, and the chase would be over. The big ship continued its course, moving straight into U-20 sights. Once in place, Spieger's crew flooded the torpedo to an fired. The torpedo burst from the submarine and was soon traveling at 40 miles an hour, with the surface of the sea as smooth as glass. The likelihood of the torpedo being seen was high. Aboard the Lusitania, a majority of the crew was hard at work, organizing the passengers' baggage. As they prepared for arrival, there were more crew than normal. About as half were starting, and the other half ending their shifts. Unfortunately, they were working directly next to where the torpedo would make contact with the ship, wiping out a majority of the people assigned to lowering the lifeboats. Crewman Leslie Morton of the crew finished up there at 2 p.m. and took his position as lookout in the forecastle of the ship. He stood on the starboard side, while another crew took the port side at 10. Morton checked his pocket watch, and as he was putting it away, he saw a large burst of bubbles. Roughly 500 yards out, next a line began to appear along the surface, headed towards the ship, as if an invisible pencil were drawing on the surface of the water along the starboard side of the ship. Many passengers witnessed this strange line headed towards the ship, many unsure what to do, some transfixed on the sight and blinking. Leslie shouted,
"Torpedo closing in on the starboard bow!"
This line of bubbles passed from view beneath the deck, and for a brief moment, nothing happened. Some thought perhaps it had missed, but the next instant, 350 pounds of explosives ignited against the hull of the ship. About 10 feet below the waterline, a wall of seawater shot up, turning the light bulb 5 into splinters. A hole the size of a small house had taken up residence on the starboard side of Lusitania. At a speed of 18 knots, the ship was forcing water into the roughly 40 by 15-foot hole, allowing 100 tons of water per second into the belly of the ship. The ship began to roll to the right and almost instantly, and then appeared to right itself. It had seemed that the watertight bulkheads were doing their job, and then the ship, although hindered, would be all right. This was until, somewhere deep within the ship, a second muffled explosion occurred, roughly 30 seconds after the first. On the bridge, Captain Turner ordered the engines, full of stern, to stop the ship. At their current speed of 18 knots, it was much too fast to release any light boats. The engines did not respond. Turner next ordered the ship to be turned to shore, but the helm also wouldn't respond. At this point, the ship was already listing 15 degrees to starboard. Inside the ship, the main electric dynamo had failed. All lights went out, leaving anyone still alive along the interior of the ship in complete darkness. The list continued to grow ever steeper, and along the deck, it was later reported that at least 70 portals had been left open. As they dipped below the waterline, it allowed another 260 tons of water per minute to enter the ship. At 10 minutes after impact, everyone on deck stood in eerie silence as they continued to wait for the ship to slow enough to begin releasing the lifeboats. As the first of the lifeboats began to be lowered, the list of the ship was so severe that the lifeboats on the starboard side hung away from the deck, leaving a gap of 5 to 8 feet, with the sea roughly 60 feet below. As passengers jumped the chasm on the starboard side, over on the port side, all lifeboats were found to be useless as they hung in towards the ship. An attempt was made to launch lifeboat 18 on the port side. It contained 40 women and children, but was held in place by a restraining pin. The sailor in charge refused to release the pin until the order had been given by the captain. This was until one of the passengers released the pin themselves in horror to the sailors' eyes. As they tried to lower it, a list to starboard happened. This caused the boat to swing in towards the hull of the ship, crushing all in the lifeboat. Back on the bridge, Captain Turner realized now that the ship would sink, so he put on his life vest and resumed the station on the bridge. He ordered the wireless operator to use auxiliary power to send out an SOS. On repeat by now, the ship was listing at 25 degrees. Turner ordered his crew to the lifeboats, but stayed on the bridge of the ship. On-deck crewman Leslie Morton was hard at work launching the lifeboats. By now the ship had slowed to roughly 4 or 5 knots, making it safe enough to release the lifeboats into the sea. As he worked, he witnessed a group of less experienced men attempting to release the lifeboat next to the one he was working on, but they lost control, dropping their boat full of passengers 30 feet onto his lifeboat, crushing all aboard it. Later, he would recount that there was no time to stop. In horror or sympathy, he moved on and found his brother attempting to release another lifeboat. The passengers aboard it refused to let go of the Lusitania, and as it slid below the surface, part of the ship hooked on the life raft, dragging it below the waterline. A short distance away from the Lusitania, German U-boat U-20 was still in the area, and on board U-20, its captain, Walter Spieger, was watching the sinking of the Lusitania through the periscope. Spieger said that he could see massive panic on the Lusitania's deck. He saw people running every which way, lifeboats capsizing, he said. It was massive chaos on the deck of the Lusitania. Spieger said in that moment that he wished there was something he could do to help some of those on board the Lusitania. He reached a point where he couldn't watch the sinking of the ship any longer. It was just too horrible for him to watch. So he stopped watching the ship through U-20 periscope. He had the crew turn the submarine round, and U-20 slowly left the site where the Lusitania was sinking and headed further out to sea. U-20 at this point was beginning its journey home to Germany. The time was 2:25 p.m., 15 minutes since torpedo detonation. Many passengers, floating with life jackets on incorrectly, found themselves struggling to keep their heads above water. But soon only passengers with properly worn jackets found themselves floating alongside hundreds of corpses. Survivors floated in the water for 3 hours, waiting for rescue, but eventually, an armada of torpedo boats and small fishing vessels began to scoop up survivors. Of the Lusitania's 1,959 passengers and crew, only 764 survived. Over 1,200 people had perished. Just 35 out of 129 children had survived. And only 4 out of 39 babies. The sinking was followed by an international outcry. Germany defended the actions of its military by stating that the Lusitania was classed as an auxiliary cruiser and therefore a legitimate target. This did little to quell the sense of injustice felt round the world, particularly in America. President Woodrow Wilson was under pressure to declare war immediately. But his goal had always been to negotiate an end to the war, not join it. He insisted that the Germans apologized for the sinking, but an apology was not forthcoming. The German Grand Admiral, Alfred von Tirpitz, claimed that the Lusitania was an armed cruiser, heavily laden with munitions. The Lusitania hadn't been armed, though she certainly had been carrying munitions in her secret compartment. The British government made the decision not to advertise this fact. The public outcry over the sinking could be invaluable to the war effort. Admitting that the Lusitania was transporting weapons would have complicated the matter. The US was not ready for a war in early 1915, but the sinking of the Lusitania set a clear path for them to join the Allies in 1917. Germany would backtrack on their submarine policy later in 1915, only attacking ships that they knew were British, and refraining from any attacks on passenger liners at all, however. When they resumed unrestricted submarine warfare in January 1917, it was a significant factor in persuading the US to join the First World War. Churchill later said, "In spite of all its horror, we must regard the sinking of the Lusitania as an event most important and favorable to the Allies. The poor babies who perished in the ocean struck a blow at German power, more deadly than could have been achieved by the sacrifice of 100,000 fighting men." They did not know it at the time. Those who perished in the sinking of the Lusitania would be a vital part of the history of World War I. Memorials to them exist in several places, including in Liverpool in the UK and Cobb in Ireland, where survivors were brought ashore. The loss of so many lives would be just one of many worsening atrocities throughout the war, but one that's at the very least begun to turn the tide.